Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Click Tease podcast. Today, we're talking about two core topics, one of which is very relevant. We are just at the beginning of February in the new year, and that means it's Super Bowl season. Whether you are a football fan or not, there's a lot that we can learn via the advertising, commercials, and marketing that brands take advantage of during this time, considering they're spending close to $10 million on 30 seconds. So, we're going to get into what that looks like and how you can leverage that in your business, as well as 2026 is the new 2016 and what that trend is in content creation and social media, and maybe how you can leverage it as well. Hi, I'm Michelle, founder of To Be Honest Beverage Company, as well as business and marketing mentor.
And I'm Joanna, co founder of Millennial Marketer, an agency that helps creators create their own digital products. Let's dive in.
So, let's talk about the Super Bowl. Again, whether you like football or not is irrelevant. A lot of people watch the Super Bowl purely for the Super Bowl ads. Now, I think that the overarching and growing sentiment is generally that the old Super Bowl commercials used to be way better than today. That's what I'm going to start with. I feel like we are trending down as far as the quality of the commercials that are coming out. And I think that's because there's a lot of pressure with the amount of money that's being spent, with the attention that are on them, and with this feeling and sentiment that things have to be over and above the top. Like we just don't have simple marketing anymore. I think a lot of people go the route of how can we blow people out of the water? How can it be overdone? How can we try to do as much as we possibly can, considering we're spending so much money, so much time, so much effort, and so much energy on this?
Super Bowl ads are so fascinating. When we started talking about that we were going to talk about this today, I let you in a little secret, Michelle, that I did my honors thesis on Super
I
Bowl
have to know
ads.
more about this because this is the first I'm hearing of it.
And so I'm not going to get all the stats right or anything like this, but I did an honors program for my degree, and part of that was having to do a thesis, as you know, for a bachelor's degree, which isn't very normal. And I, in one of my marketing classes, learned a couple of interesting stats about Super Bowl ads that just made me like really want to study this. Um, and there were two things. One was that it's at the time, so this was back in, I don't know, 2012. I'm old. This was like
It's okay,
back in
me too.
2012. I'm like, "Oh, wow, I'm kind of old." But at the time, the majority of people viewing the Super Bowl were actually women. So, like, it's slightly skewed to female watchers on the Super Bowl. The other thing I learned at the same time, which gave me this idea for this study, was that in households, 80% of buying decisions are made by women. So the majority of people who watch Super Bowl are women, and then the majority of purchasing decisions get made by women in a household.
Absolutely.
You looked like you were gonna
No,
say something.
absolutely. I think this is kind of, not just for Super Bowl, but overarching when it comes to digital platforms, when it comes to the household, is that the majority of purchasing decisions still lay with the female or the woman or that person, which kind of makes sense when you're thinking about it. If you kind of look at the like historical narratives of men versus women in the household and what they're responsible for. If the man is the quote unquote breadwinner, then the woman is managing the household. And so they're going to buy everything that makes up your home, from furniture to food to, even just covering like general bills, utilities, those types of things. So I don't think that that has changed much, even though our family dynamics have completely shifted and a lot of women's and female head of households are the breadwinners these days. I still think that that is one of the things that I don't think people always understand when it comes to marketing.
Yeah, and women in a household, whether or not the woman is making the money or not, she's often choosing what brand of laundry soap do we get? What food do we buy? What sheets do I purchase? What chips? And I'm thinking of things that are often sold in Super Bowl. Even when it comes to the family car or purchasing a car, it's normally, yes, both partners often talk about it, but the person making that final choice of what to buy does tend to be, on average, according to research, the woman. So when I learned those things, I was like, are advertisers taking advantage of the fact that they've got all of these women watching these ads, they're spending all of this money. Are they actually advertising to women, or because football is seen as like a masculine thing and a masculine thing to watch, are they potentially alienating their female audience by running advertisements that are potentially actually offensive to women? So I actually watched 2 years of Super Bowl commercials. My husband helped me. He was my research assistant.
That sounds like
Um,
fun.
and we watched 2 years of Super Bowl ads and did a survey where we, found this scale to use for like whether it was attractive to women, uh, neutral, or like harmful to women. And in in that study, we actually found that advertisers were alienating female viewers a little bit while making these Super Bowl ads where they were missing an opportunity to appeal to women. And when we think about a lot of the first commercial I can think of, I don't even know what brand it's for, but that like "What's up"
Oh my
commercial.
gosh, yeah, the wasabi. That
Like
one?
what brand is that?
I wanna say something like Taco Bell, if I remember correct.
Well,
I'm gonna go I'll Google it, and
we'll have to look it up.
confirm it and figure it out, but that commercial, if you're especially of our generation, that is, like, one of the longest, I think, standing and most impressionable advertisements, but you have to think about whether it was successful in leaving the impression or whether it was associating the brand with that advertisement, right? Like, we cannot necessarily remember versus every single, I think, Pepsi commercial, for example, that I remember, I know that it's a Pepsi commercial. There is no questioning there, because for a long time they had the pop stars, and so I feel like every single year was a new pop star and it was this cool, dancy, like, quote unquote, fun, sexy advertisement. But it was never like, oh, who was that brand and what was that associated with? It was very clearly representing Pepsi.
Yeah. And actually, if you think about it for a second in the relation of my thesis, that "Was Up" commercial is very like male centric, like funny to men, right? Like it's a bunch of men saying "What's up" in a funny voice to each other. Whereas like those Pepsi commercials leaned in on pop culture and things women were familiar with and would likely connect, right? So you and I remember the Britney Spears Pepsi commercial, but you and I don't remember what brand says
Which actually kinda
"What's
makes
up."
sense.
And
I just looked it up. It's Budweiser.
ah,
Yeah, so beer.
there
I
you
have
go.
never consumed Budweiser, but yeah, it's like men calling each other and doing that "What's up" line. So, apparently it's for Budweiser, which is interesting.
Yeah. But then when you think about it, they want to associate Budweiser with the Super Bowl. Who is most likely the person going to the store and making the purchases for that Super Bowl party? Right? So you do want to make sure you're not missing an opportunity to attract the person that's going to be making the purchases, right? And alienating them from making that purchasing decision. And if you're spending $30 million, right?
Well, so
On a
approximately
single
$10 million on the 30-second slot, but that's just how much you're paying for the positioning and the
right.
right? So you're not accounting for the team, the filming, any celebrity endorsement, like, all of that production. So I'm assuming it reaches close to 30 million
Yeah,
or at least 20 million or something like
with
that.
all of
Yeah.
that. Yeah. If you're spending all of that money, you better be sure your audience targeting is
Yeah,
right
talk to the
and
right
memorable.
person. Like for Budweiser, I could totally see because you want to put people in a place of authority or feeling good about their positioning. So if you're talking to the wives who are going to buy the Budweiser and what that looks like, putting them in a positive light and putting them in a good spin, And so I think that that's such a good point. So thank you for sharing that from your
Yeah.
thesis.
Oh, you're
And
welcome.
it makes total sense. I mean, it's for us all to learn is like, who are we talking to? Who are we specifically speaking directly to in our content, in our marketing, and how are we appealing to them? Now, I have to say, like, the quality thing of the commercials over time has really, really shifted. And it actually kind of ties into our second topic in my mind from the nostalgia perspective is that we're heading into the age of AI. We're heading into over the top. When you look at our movies, our entertainment, our media, our marketing, like there's so much that is overdone. And I think people have a consistent kind of across the board feeling or sentiment that there's a little bit of like nostalgia or missing the old days when things were simpler, when things were more trustworthy, when things were more transparent, when they're more easy to access and understand. And so when I think about the old Super Bowl commercials, when people really, really got invested in them, now I looked at, so I was watching one of the YouTubes of, the 2026 teaser trailer things, which is one of the things we'll talk about today and how you can leverage teasers and actually dropping hints about stuff in your marketing, which I think is a powerful choice of the brands. But when looking at that, reading all of the comments, most of them, if not all of them, were negative about how bad the commercials have become versus what they used to be when they were much more simple. And I would say even more creative. Now they just seem, I don't even know how to describe it. Like, how would you describe some of the commercials, advertising, marketing that we're seeing today that just makes me think like what is this stupidity? Like this is the sentiment I get when I watch it. Is like what is the stupid shit that people are going through and how did someone make a bunch of money to come up with this idea? How did it get funded and how is it reaching people when it's just like I can't. I don't understand.
Especially because, like, these companies have all of the budget, all of the minds, any
Top
talent they
talent.
want.
Like we're talking top talent across the board in marketing are developing these concepts for some of the biggest brands
Yeah,
in the world.
yeah. I mean, I think okay, I think some of the complaints are valid, but some of the complaints are probably like a little confirmation bias, right? Because if you have now I watched 2 whole years of
Oh,
advertisements once,
and this was
but
this was the in the time that you were doing the thesis, right? So you were watching
yeah.
2 years
So
worth
it was like
of like
2012.
so
I think it was 2011,
so let's
2013.
say
2011, 2012.
so that's what 14 years ago. So we're comparing,
Yeah.
like a decade to over a decade ago, which I would think is I'm pretty sure when we're kind of referring to all of those very classic Super Bowl ads that lots of people think of when they think
Yeah.
of Super Bowl ads was probably around that time-ish, give or take a few years.
Yeah. But the reality of that now, if I could go get my data, I would tell you, but there's hundreds of commercials, right? There are hundreds of commercials from that time period. And there's probably like in that year, there were 3 or 4 standouts.
Good point.
So then, so then when we're looking at in our current year, well, they're not as good as they used to be. Well, are there 3 or 4 standouts? Probably yes, right? That you can talk about and remember. So I think there is this reality that our expectation is like, oh my gosh, all the commercials are so good, but there were probably like 5 good ones. And maybe this year there were only 3 good ones, but that's not that different, right? But I do get what you're saying. You'd think though that it would get better and better with data and new talent and people learning, but it's at least stagnant or getting worse, right? Like it's one of those two things. It's either staying the same or getting worse. And that's sad because that's like the best part. I don't really care about football at all. I'm really excited for the commercials to see if any are good, and I'm really excited for Bad Bunny. And like that's it.
Everyone's got a different we all have different things that we're into, and Super Bowl people have camps, right? People show up for different reasons, and that's okay. I think that with the commercials, similar to the trend that we're gonna talk about, is there's a little bit of, like, rose-colored glasses. Like, we look back and I've been experiencing this a lot actually in my personal life, is I feel like looking back and having that sentiment of either nostalgia or things were better when, or things, again, maybe they were more simple. I think that a lot of times we get stuck in what's happening right now is not as good as it used to be, but we can't necessarily always say because again, we're looking at it with 2020 hindsight. We're not thinking of all of the things that went wrong. We're not thinking of all of the bad commercials. So it's good not necessarily to sit in that comparison, and know that that was part of the evolution process. So, for some of us personally, whether that's in your content, your marketing, your business, looking back at that time and thinking, "Oh, it was so easy," or, "Oh, I did that," or, "Oh, this thing," but knowing that that was part of the evolution, whether it was good, bad, or otherwise. But yeah, Super Bowl, I still think it'll be so interesting to see what comes around this year, how people are going to approach this process. But I think that people or brands and businesses who are leveraging not just the time for the Super Bowl commercial, but everything surrounding it. So here are some of the additions that I think people are taking advantage of when it comes to this time that is also valuable. So when you think about it, and a lot of people actually just shun Super Bowl commercials and are like $10 million for 30 seconds. Well, that's ridiculous. Like that should not be a good choice in marketing. But if you look at businesses and brands who are already putting out teasers, maybe of multiple styles of commercials to see what lands the best already, they're already introducing their name, their business, their messaging. They're giving you a preview of that. And then when you see it actually in the Super Bowl setting, it's just kind of re solidifying that. We often think in our own content, in our own marketing, that we either are annoying people, spamming people, being too repetitive, showing up too much, or are so focused on that one thing being the thing that we're not taking into account the consumer and how much they're exposed to. So, one of the lessons I feel like that we can learn from this is being able to give more in our content, in our marketing, and not worry so much about like, okay, it's a $10 million ad. Well, I can also have a bunch of social media posts around this. We're also centering around emails. We're doing these like events in these different places. So not putting everything in one bucket, but then also knowing that your audience wants to hear from you. You need to expose yourself to them and you need to repeat your business, your brand, your values, your marketing in lots of different ways in all these different contexts and be okay with that. It was a lot. I wanted to get it
Yeah.
all in.
Ugh. End of what you do, you can increase purchases without having to say, go buy my thing. So Doritos is a brand that is always on Super Bowl commercials. I probably buy Doritos like 4 times a year, and one of them is for Super Bowl Sunday, right? Like, they're not something I buy regularly, but I feel like I need Doritos at my Super Bowl party. And so when you have that association with something, and people think, well, it's just the Super Bowl, it's not really like it's football season. And how many football games and how many people, like, again, I don't watch football, but a lot of people watch football every single Sunday throughout football season or even college football or any of that. They buy snacks, they buy food. It's communal. You want people buying your products for those things because then someone will come to their party, get that, they will buy it for their party, and then it will be like a thing they buy regularly. So there's also that like association. And if you want to be associated with football, then you need to be advertising during football, whether that's the Super Bowl or any of the other, things you can advertise on. And so when you associate yourself with the things that make sense for you to associate with, then you should do it.
And Super Bowl, like you said, like I used to watch football and then I didn't for a very long time. And I will say that I definitely have a bias toward sports and entertainment and how much money is surrounding that just kind of drives me up a wall, especially as someone who came from the perspective and mindset that like function is the most important thing. Health and well-being and movement, and that was like a big deal for me. And in the products that I created and the offers that I put out in the world, I wanted them to have nothing to do with the quote unquote frivolous or entertainment or otherwise. But over time, I've really come to see the value of entertainment and how important it is for the human species and how it's important for us as a culture and as humanity to have these things that bring us together, that we can believe in, that drive hope. There's athleticism and there's things to the actual game, but I think that the community that comes around these activities and sports is more important. And I think that's really powerful, especially when we have a lot of other struggles that are pulling us in all these different directions and difficulties that divide us. So, again, love or hate it, but seeing those aspects of it can kind of change the perspective. And so with Super Bowl, giving yourself the time and space to enjoy what it is that you are either just going to get out of it, or again, take away and learn the lesson that entertainment is okay. Like, don't give yourself that narrow lens, or what's that word when you put up like blinders in your businesses and in your life. And I still think from a marketing perspective, we are headed more towards the entertainment rather than the educational
Yeah.
side. So it's you might have what I'm trying to say is don't share the same blinders that I feel like I had in my business where I limited myself to just, I have to be the professional, I have to be the expert, I have to show up, I have to focus on education. Everything I do is for function. And don't discount the human need and drive for entertainment, for community, for connection, for other values that maybe you're missing out on, or maybe you're not sharing appropriately in your business, in your content right now, but that you could integrate to be able to bring in more people or to connect on a more human, realistic, like relatable level.
Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the 2026 is the new 2016 trend. And this trend, truth be told, it's kind of on its way out on social media. It was much bigger towards the end of the year and beginning of this year. And so, what is really interesting about, are you okay?
I
Like,
did took a sip
what?
of tea and I just spilled it all down my front, the front. Oh yeah, I'm just it was ridiculous. I took a sip of tea and the tea bags smacked forward, and I am wearing a white shirt and it just spilled all down my front, which is just ridiculous. So, yep. Well, here we are.
Well, it is what it is.
Yep. I was totally listening to everything that you said though. I was very zoned in.
So much so you got hit in the face
Yeah, it's
with
like,
the tea
God,
bag.
what's that annoying thing is when the tea bags are there, and I always forget. It's just so silly when they're, like, stuck and then they, like, fall towards you. Yeah, I try not to let it happen, but oh, well.
Apparently, it happens a
Apparently
lot.
happens a lot. It's like ice when ice gets stuck in the bottom of your glass. Just don't if you're watching the video, just don't look at this side of my shirt. It's embarrassing.
You're gonna be like this the whole time. Um, wow. Sorry. On that note, the 2026 is the new 2016 trend. And basically, what's happening is people are trying to say we're resetting back 10 years to 2016 when theoretically things were better. People are sharing photos of themselves from 2016, sharing music, sharing fashion. And it's kind of just like a fun cultural moment that's really on its way out on the internet. And I think it's really interesting because my daughter actually told me about my daughter told me about the trend before I heard about it, and she was like, "Oh, it's 2016." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And she was like going over what it was. And there's this talk of this great meme reset where at the end of 2026 we're just going to start resharing all of the memes from 2016 because that was theoretically the golden age of memes. So it's this fun cultural moment that a lot of creators are taking advantage of.
I think it brings back and draws back in the desire for simplicity and nostalgia. I mean, if you look at fashion and how fashion comes around again, I don't know if you've noticed this, Joanna, or maybe it's me. We're based in California, San Luis Obispo specifically, the Central Coast, and I'm in Providence, Rhode Island right now, so it's like 20 degrees. But back home, it's been like 75, 80, super sunny, really nice. And so I've been going to the beach and hanging out, and I live in a college town. So Cal Poly is our local university. And so we have that like 18, 19, 20, 21, maybe a little bit older, but kind of those like very prominent ages. And I have noticed that the 90s for style is like back in force. And I'm talking like tomboy 90s, where girls are wearing like loose fitted, like skater style pants, maybe little crop tops, bucket hats, and Adidas or whatever. And it's just things like to cycle back, right? And social media is one of those places where there is a lot of concern for what's relevant, what people are doing, what's most popular, what's trendy, and everything else. And this 2026 is the new 2016 concept and idea is similar in that like people love the throwback energy. People like to again look back with either those rose colored glasses or just the fact of like nostalgia. Oh, those were better times. Those were simpler times. They might not have been. I don't even know where I was. I'd have to really think hard about 2016 and think through like what was I doing and where was I and what was my life like at that time. But I think with social media it's that same idea is just like with our Super Bowl commercials, is like people are going over the top. Things are really complicated and sometimes more serious as a certain tone, not in like haha versus serious, but the depth of the content creation has become maybe more complex in certain ways. And the 2016 trend is looking at like super simple photos or that dog filter on the article that you shared with me, Joanna, or like highly stylized photos. And I think that again, people like to associate with, they like to enjoy things that they are aware of. It's like if you think of your favorite show and how many times you may have watched reruns or gotten on Netflix and binged watched old episodes, even though you've seen them before, because there's something comfortable and there's something that we enjoy in that knowing, that association, that affiliation, that having been aware of it for the past decade. And I think that's what this trend is leaning into. And I don't think it's going to be the last of this kind. And I think it's something that we can utilize, even if we're not referring back to 2016, right?
Yeah, that nostalgia, that throwback. And again, it goes honestly back to psychological triggers at the end of the day, right? Because when you do throwback to 2016, someone thinks, what was I doing in 2016? Oh my gosh, I experienced the same thing, or whatever it is for them, there's that connection. There have been other trends that are similar, like showing there was like that the trend using teenage dirtbag where people were sharing their high school photos, right? And like going back and throwing back to that. It's entertaining, you relate to it, you connect with it. And I think that throwback idea is something that will always be relevant. But for some people, that leaning into that nostalgia can and leaning into it can kind of like change the trajectory of your career. There's a singer who's had a huge resurgence, Zara Larson, whose song was associated with a viral trend. So a song of hers back in from 2017 was actually associated with a viral trend using like Lisa Frank imagery, like the dolphins and the colorfuls and the rainbows. So that went viral and she like leaned into it. She changed her style to like Y2K. She had colorful rainbows. Now she's touring and charting and doing all of this thing, even though she's kind of her music has been around, right? But she was not in the like top pop girly space. But like she leaned into that nostalgia that just happened to happen with a viral trend that she had nothing to do with and has had a resurgence. So like for us as creators, like you just never know when you can lean into something and go with it and rebrand in a way that makes you fresh and interesting. Because, you know, this song that she released in 2017 in 2026, my daughter's streaming it and she's 8, right? She was born when the song was made, but now she loves the song and it's one of her favorite songs, which is like wild to think about. So, in some ways, the social media is so frustrating because it feels so you post and it's gone. Do you know, like it kind of feels like I create something, I put it out in the world and then it disappears. But then it's also cool on the opposite spectrum because you never know when something's going to take off and like change what you're doing.
Yeah, and I think that the perspective really helps is there's a lot of stuff that we talk about now, like we've talked about the on this podcast a bit. And if you haven't yet, hit subscribe so you get every single weekly update when we chat about these things and important topics for yourself and your business and your marketing. But with these topics, a lot of what's talked about currently now can have a lot of emotional connection, right? Like, for example, that the it ends with us. I still see content around like the Blake Lively, Taylor Swift, and Ryan Reynolds and Justin Baldoni, I think his name is. I see stuff around that, and a lot of that stuff is triggered and emotionally charged now, but with time and with perspective, people can refer back to things with a little less charge. Not that that's a good example of what you want to talk about in your business, but let's just say like the dog filter. Some people, I'm sure, felt very strongly about not liking the dog filter and think it was totally ridiculous. However, those people today would look back and have less of a hate sentiment and more of a, oh, yeah, I remember and I recall that. So if in your content, if in your marketing, if you're throwing back to things or hearkening back or recalling things that happened 3, 5, 10 years ago, people are more likely or more inclined to have a slightly, I wouldn't say positive reaction, but let's just say neutral reaction to it instead of something that's super you're gonna get a lot of hate comments for, you know what I mean? So, I think it's neat. I think trending, as far as, like, referring back to also, I love the simplicity of content. I see a lot of stuff that, again, is over the top today, and I can't say that it's a lot better, you know? I still like simple talking to head content or simple, like, chopped up B-roll with text on screen, and or even, we're seeing a lot of carousels and a lot of static posts and just dropping of content, and there's a Y2K party or something that I think ChatGPT hosted. I think we talked about it a little bit, but she hosted an in-person like Y2K party where you would dress up in that style and theme and you couldn't have your cell phone there. So I will say, I think that we're heading more consistently into this like divide of like super innovative, everything is tech forward, but then also people consistently wanting nostalgia, consistently wanting like old school, simple, easier. And I think you just decide where your brand fits into each of those and choose accordingly.
Yeah, and I think that that right there is maybe the most important thing to think about in this whole array is like be aware of trends, right? Be aware of these things. And then you still have to have your brand presence, your kind of core values and mission, and create in a way that works for that, right? Create what makes sense for your audience, for your brand. And if the 2026, 2016 trend like feels right and makes sense to you, great. If you're like, oh, I'm all about simple, easy to create, no frills content, make that. If that doesn't feel right to you and you are the kind of person that like I want the production, I want the things, it's going to be a lot more expensive. I mean, I think one of the reasons all of this stuff is trending is because groceries are like really expensive and people have less money to spend. Like the economy is not so great, right? So like I think people are leaning into the low budget because they need to, honestly, in some ways. But if you have the money and you have the budget and you desire that like high touch, high production quality content, then make it. But you have to make what works for you and what works for your brand.
Absolutely. So lean into what's going to work for you. Everything that we talk about and share is always great as a reflection point and for you to be able to take in and say, okay, great. That makes sense. I see that that's happening, but it doesn't mean that you just have to top on every single trend, every single opportunity. And I think, especially when you're getting started in your content creation journey, or even if you've been in it for years, you can feel a lot of times the pressure or the pull from what's quote unquote popular instead of what's true to you and what's authentic to your voice and what makes sense for your business and your brand. So, as much as you can, lean into that. That's all we've got for the Click Tease podcast today. Hit subscribe if you have not yet, and we'll see you next week.